Hanukkah beyond Latkes. As I mentioned last week, there's a perception that Hanukkah is a minor holiday. So much so that certain individuals who consider themselves to be Jewish leaders, rabbis, and others have made a strong attempt in the last few decades to downplay the significance of Hanukkah by emphasizing that it's a minor holiday. And the reason for this, I think, is because they felt that Jews are conflating Hanukkah with the Jewish counterpart to the non-Jewish holiday. The non-Jews have their holiday, so we also have to start something and do something. So we have a Hanukkah, as if Hanukkah came later. But of course, Hanukkah predated the non-Jewish holiday of this season. And there's no reason why we should downplay the importance of Hanukkah, because some people erroneously think that Hanukkah is the Jewish response to the non-Jewish holiday. Also, another thing is that some Jewish leaders, rabbis and others, felt that Hanukkah is becoming too commercialized, just like the non-Jewish holiday, which is again a very sad reason why we should minimize the importance of Hanukkah. On the contrary, we should emphasize how important it is and not give in to the people who feel that Hanukkah is a time just to get gifts and so on. There was also an attempt to stop public Hanukkah Menorah lightings. The Rabbi encouraged very strongly establishing Hanukkah menorahs all over the world, in every Jewish community. And it was strange, but rabbis were fighting against it, claiming that Hanukkah should remain in with the family. There's no reason to publicize it. Of course, these rabbis only use the title rabbi, but they're not very learned, to put it mildly, because the whole essence of Hanukkah is publicizing the miracle. That's how the Talmud describes Hanukkah. It's a time to publicize the miracle. And if it wouldn't be publicizing the miracle, there would be no Hanukkah. Hanukkah is all about miracles. It's all about publicizing those miracles. And even though many people have a custom, we'll discuss this the next week, of lighting the Hanukkah menorah inside the home, in the olden days they used to light the Hanukkah menorah at the exit of your house, the entrance of your house to the street. But that's only done in some places. In Israel, it's still being done in warm climates. There are reasons why it stopped being done, but even though we do it in our homes, some people put it on their windows and some people put it in their doorposts. But the idea is to publicize the miracle, and if you can't publicize it by lighting your own menorah, the public menorah would serve that purpose. Why is Hanukkah not a minor holiday, but a major holiday? And it's not just a major, it's a major holiday. In spite of the fact that it doesn't have the same restrictions that other Jewish holidays have, such as Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot. Those are holidays in which we're restricted from doing certain kinds of work. But Hanukkah and Purim, we don't have those restrictions. So why is Hanukkah considered such an important holiday, such a unique holiday? It starts off with a midrash. When the Torah tells the story of the dedication of the tabernacle, the sanctuary in the desert, this goes back way before the story of Hanukkah. And when they dedicated the temple, the leader of each of the 12 tribes would bring a special offering to dedicate the temple. The tribe of Levi was excluded. Aaron, who was the leader of the tribe of Levi, Moses' brother, was not given an opportunity to bring an offering to dedicate the Mishkan. And what did he think? He felt terrible. Why did he feel terrible? He felt that God was still holding a grudge against him for being involved in the creation of the golden calf. And he thought that God is shunning him. And Aaron is a very holy person. To him, that was the biggest downer. And then God tells Moses to tell him he shouldn't feel bad. What he's going to do to light the menorah is far more important than the offerings that all those leaders are going to bring. Why is it so better? Why is it superior? Because while the sacrifices that they brought would cease with the destruction of the temple, the light of the menorah will burn forever. That means even after the destruction of the temple, we'll still have the light of the menorah of the temple. But we don't have the temple, and we don't have the menorah in the temple, but we have Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a replacement for the lighting of the menorah in the temple, so the light of Hanukkah still remains strong to this day. So that means in terms of the past, Hanukkah menorah, which we do in Hanukkah, which is the main part of Hanukkah, lighting of the menorah. There are other things that we do in Hanukkah, but the most important part is the lighting of the menorah, is something that never stopped, even though the temple was destroyed. Not only is it that way unique in terms of the past, in terms of the future, the Midrash tells us that when Mashiach will come, all the holidays will disappear. Now, they don't mean literally disappear, because the Torah was not going to change, but they will become insignificant compared to the new light, the new holiday that will be ushered in because of the redemption, because of the final redemption. But there are exceptions to that rule. And in one version of the Midrash, the exceptions are Hanukkah and Purim, which most people think are the least significant of the holidays, but those will still remain strong. The light of Hanukkah is not going to become dim in the presence of greater light, because the light of Hanukkah is the light of the future. Some of the great Jewish theologians and Kabbalists and Hasidic masters point to a Midrash that says that when God created the world, day one, he said, Yehi Or, let there be light. But there was no sun. The sun was only put into motion on the day 4. So what does it mean when it says, let there be light? So the Midrash answers that that was a different kind of light. That was not the light that we have from the sun. That was a spiritual light that also illuminated the world physically, but it was such a light that you were able to see from one end of the world to the other. You were able to see things that you cannot see with just sunlight or any other kind of light. It was a very powerful spiritual light. That light, what happened to it? God concealed it. He says the world is not ready for it. Imagine if a thief would have access to that light where he could see from one end of the world to the other. He'd see where everyone keeps their treasures, and he would rob the world. It says that in the Midrash, that God saw that the wicked, it's not good for them to have access to this light, so he hid it, and it will be revealed again in the Messianic age. But on Chanukah, we get a glimpse of that light. When we light the menorah, that little flickering candle, or olive oil, whichever we use, is giving you a taste of the light of the past and the light of the future. You don't have that in other holidays. You have that only in Hanukkah. Another unique thing about Hanukkah is that in every holiday, as in every area of Jewish practice, there are laws that require you to do certain things, and if you want to be more conscientious, you do it in a more complete way. You want to buy a mezuzah, you can get a mezuzah. The cheapest kosher mezuzah nowadays would be about $50 or $60, which is cheap, because you have to realize a mezuzah is written by a scribe, a trained scribe. It's not just it's skilled labor, and it takes him a few hours. And if he makes one mistake, he has to redo the whole thing. The parchment itself costs money. So you're talking about he's getting, and when the time it gets to the wholesaler and the retailer and to you, he's making like $10 an hour.
How long is the mezuzah good for this?
Forever.
You don't replace it every so often?
No, you don't have to if it's good. If it remains. It doesn't always remain. It's something, the weather conditions could affect the mezuzah. That's why we have them checked.
How often do you have them checked?
Ideally, every year, if not twice every 7 years.
Because I know the Rabbi would often, when things were going...
Would encourage people to check their mezuzahs, right. So, a mezuzah, if you want to get a cheap, basic mezuzah, it's kosher, it's fine. If you want to do it with more excellence and more beauty, you get a better one. A mezuzah written by a scribe who is even more professionally capable and a more beautiful script and so on and so forth. There are always two standards in every area of Jewish law. There's the basic, and there's the beautifying it. It's called hidur mitzvah, beautifying the mitzvah, making the mitzvah more beautiful. It's a sign that you're a conscientious person. Hanukkah, you have three levels. No other place in Judaism do you have 3 levels. The basic level of Hanukkah is to light 1 candle each night for as many people that live in that home. The higher standard is that each person should light their own 1 candle every night. The highest standard is that everyone should light 1 the first night, 2 the second night, 3 the third night, and we go up from 1 to 8. That everyone follows that standard, not just 1 for the whole household. And that's the common practice. But you only have that on Hanukkah, because Hanukkah is unique in terms of what its miracle entailed. Usually, God performs miracles, not usually, always, when there's someone in danger. The Jews were slaves, they had to be liberated. The Egyptians are pursuing them, and they're going to drown in the sea. God splits the sea. God performs miracles to save people from calamity. Hanukkah was different. Hanukkah, the miracle was not to save them from a calamity, but is to enable them to fulfill a mitzvah. That's the only time we have an example of a miracle that God performs just to facilitate doing a mitzvah. That's a standard that we don't find with God's actions. So that's why we respond by doing it on a higher standard, even higher than the higher standards of other mitzvahs. That's how the Rabbi explains why there are three levels, as opposed to every other area of Jewish law where there are only 2 levels. Let's talk about the word Hanukkah itself. What does the word Hanukkah mean? Dedication. Why is it called dedication? Because the Syrian Greeks defiled the temple. They didn't destroy the temple. They didn't want to destroy it. The temple was a beautiful structure. Why should you destroy it? What they did was to defile it, to use it for pagan worship, to sacrifice pigs to their idols, used it for immorality. So the structure was defiled, and they had to rededicate it. When the Maccabees liberated the temple, they came into the temple, they saw it was in shambles, so they had to dedicate it. So they had to build a new altar. The old altar was not used. They had to build a new altar, and everything else had to be rededicated. And it's interesting that it happened on the 25th day of Kislev. Something else happened decades, centuries earlier, when they built the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, which was the first temple that was ever constructed. It was completed on the 25th of Kislev. But it wasn't dedicated then. It was dedicated months later on Nisan, for whatever reason. And calendar days have feelings as well. The 25th of Kislev felt cheated. And God doesn't cheat anyone. So God says, don't worry. The 25th of Kislev will, one day in the future, become an important holiday of dedication. It's not the day that they dedicated the Mishkan, the tabernacle, but it will be the day that they will rededicate the temple. And that happened on the 25th of Kislev. So Chanukah simply means dedication, but there's also 2 other meanings given. Maybe more than 2, but I'm familiar with 2. One of them is that it's really 2 words separately, 2 separate words put together. Chanukah is Chanu, Chaf Hey. Chaf Hey is 25. In Hebrew, letters are numbers. So Chaf is 20 and Hey is 5. Chanu means they encamped. They rested on the 25th. They were fighting battles until then. And the day that they rested, they had a respite from their battles, was the 25th of Kislev. So Chanu, they encamped. Chaf Hey on the 25th. Then there's a third interpretation, which is not it's understood, it's not the obvious one. It's a hint that the word Chanukah is an acronym for Chet, Nerot, 8 lights, V'halacha, and the law follows Beis Hillel, as the school of Hillel. Some of you probably remember that we light the Hanukkah menorah in ascending order. That's the school of Hillel. The school of Shammai says we do it in descending order. The first day we do 8, the second day 7, then 6. We go down to 1, the last day of Hanukkah. Which is the system that we follow? We always follow the school of Hillel when he argues with the school of Shammai. And we do it in ascending order. So the Hebrew word Chanukah is an acronym, 8 lights, and the law follows the school of Hillel. Yes?
Yeah, do Shammai and Hillel analogously do the same thing between Shabbats, going down from 7 to 6 to 5?
No. It's not Shammai and Hillel that argue, the school of Shammai and the school of Hillel. Hillel and Shammai themselves didn't argue that much. It's the students who argue.
Is it true in the world to come that we'll follow Shammai over
Right.
Hillel?
According to the Arizal, the great Kabbalist in the Messianic age, we're going to reverse and we're going to follow the school of Shammai.
Does he give a reason?
Does he give a reason? No, he doesn't give a reason, but there is a reason. Maybe later on I'll go into it. If I don't, remind me. Don't let me get away with it. Everything is hinted in the Torah. When I say the Torah, we mean the 5 books of Moses. Everything is hinted there. Where are the hints to Chanukah? Chanukah happened how many years after the Torah was written? After the Torah was written, it took 400 plus years before they built the first temple. Then 410 years of the first temple duration, then 70 years of exile, and another 200 years. So you're talking about 1,000 years later, but it's hinted in the Torah. Where is Hanukkah hinted in the Torah? So there are many different hints. There are probably dozens of them, but I'm going to mention a few of them. The 25th word of the Torah. Remember, 25 is the key number for Hanukkah. So if anyone asks you, can you think of a number relating to Hanukkah? You could probably... 25, very good. But you could also use 8. You could use 36, 44. This is not a football game. The 25th word of the Torah is light, or. God says, Yehi or, let there be light. So the 25th word is the word for light. And what is that Torah talking about? The Torah says when God created the world, there was darkness on the face of the deep. And the Midrash explains that every term used in the beginning of the Torah before the light comes in refers to one of the exiles. When the Torah says darkness prevailed, that refers to the Greeks, to Greek culture that tormented the Jews leading up to the miracle and the story of Hanukkah. So when it says Yehi or, let there be light, that's the light of Hanukkah that dispelled the darkness of Greece and its ideology. When the Jews were traveling in the desert, the Torah lists the 42 journeys. The 25th journey is Hashmona, which is the source of the word Hashmonaim, the Hasmoneans. So it's the 25th journey. When the Torah speaks of creating the olive oil for the menorah in the temple, the word before the Torah discusses the olive oil is nechoshet. Nechoshet is an acronym, Ner Chanukah Smol Tadlik. The light of Hanukkah you light at the left side of your entrance of your house. So that's an acronym for that. When the Torah in Leviticus talks about all the holidays, every one of the Jewish holidays, it's followed by the building of the menorah. It's a hint, another hint for Hanukkah. The word light in the Torah is mentioned 36 times. 36 is the number of candles we light during the whole Hanukkah. If you add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8, it'll give you 36. If you don't believe me, you can take out your calculators. The light of Adam, remember I said that Hanukkah is a rekindling of, or a taste of, the light of the past and the light of the future. Well, that light was hidden by God, but it was not hidden until after Adam experienced 36 hours of it, Adam and Eve. So the original light benefited humanity for 36 hours, and corresponding to that, we have 36 candles that we light during Hanukkah. The number 36 is also a significant number in other ways. There are 36 volumes of the Talmud, which is the light of the Jewish people. The name Leah also adds up to 36. So anyone with the name Leah is a source of light. Anyone here with the name Leah? Okay. What was the miracle of Hanukkah? There's a very big discussion about it throughout all of Jewish literature. It seems to be that there were two miracles. The miracle of the victories over the Syrian Greeks, who were overwhelmingly superior to them, to the Jews, in terms of their numbers, in terms of their know-how, in terms of their training, in terms of their weapons. And we won decisively. That was a major miracle. The other miracle was the miracle of the menorah. But when they came to the temple to relight the menorah, they only had one cruse of oil that was enough to last for one night, and it lasted 8 nights. Yet we make a much bigger fuss about the miracle of the menorah than we do of the victory. And the question is asked, why do we make such a big fuss about the menorah? How many people saw the miracle of the menorah? No one knows the exact number, but a handful. Because in the temple, one Kohen would light the menorah. You don't need more than one. Maybe you had one that cleaned the menorah, make sure that it had no remnants of the oil of the past. But this was a new menorah. You didn't even have to do that. So you had one Kohen lighting the menorah, and maybe there were a few Kohanim that hung around and watched it. So how many people saw that miracle? A handful of people. And if you didn't see the amount of oil put in there and you just saw the menorah burning, how do you know it was a miracle? You only know if you were the one who actually put the oil in the menorah. So it was a very limited miracle in terms of the publicity that it got. The miracle of the victory, everyone saw. That was incredible. And yet we make a much bigger fuss of the miracle of the menorah. Why is that? So the basic answer is, we were not attacked by the Syrian Greeks. They didn't want to kill us. They didn't want to destroy the Jewish people the way the Nazis wanted, the way Haman wanted, the way the Romans did. They wanted the Jews to become like them, Greeks, to follow Greek culture, Greek beliefs, pagan worship, Greek values. That's what they wanted. If we would have acceded to their demands, not only would we not have been destroyed, they would have promoted us, because they love converts. Converts were always promoted, certain converts were always promoted by the missionaries who forced Jews into conversion. So why did we fight? We fought only because of our desire to remain faithful to Judaism, to remain faithful to Jewish practice. So the victory was not really a victory for our physical existence, because our physical existence was not threatened. What was threatened was our Judaism. Once we fought against them because we wanted to preserve our Jewish identities and our Jewish practices, then they started killing us. So the war was actually a derivative of the miracle of the menorah, not the other way around. It's not because we won the victory we could light the menorah, but because we wanted to light the menorah, which symbolizes all of Jewish observance. That's why we had to fight, and that's why we had to be saved miraculously. So the real miracle of Hanukkah revolves around the lighting of the menorah. Now the Maharal, one of the great 16th century philosophers and Kabbalists and Jewish leaders, he says the main miracle was the victory. That was the main miracle. But in order for people to know that the victory was not a natural one, because people like to rationalize. I remember talking to people after the Yom Kippur War. Some people said there were no miracles. The Yom Kippur War was not, the Six-Day War was a miracle war. The Yom Kippur War was not miraculous. The Rabbi responded to that, and he says the miracles of the Yom Kippur War were much greater than the Six-Day War. And in the illustration of that, he said, when Egypt broke through, and they broke through the lines of the Israeli soldiers, and the Syrians did likewise, they were on the road to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Nothing was there to stop them. That we were not prepared. And they stopped. That was an incredible miracle. And I remember telling this to people then, and people said, no, they had a reason why they stopped. People like to rationalize miracles and not admit that this was an incredible thing. The fact that they had the ability to march directly to Tel Aviv and massacre every Jew on the way, which is what you know that they were planning to do. How do we know that? Because they did it. You know the kid who comes running to his mother and says, Ma, my neighbor Joe wants to hit me. She says, how do you know he wants to hit me? He wants to hit you. He said, because he did. And that's how you know. We know what they wanted to do because it's what they did. And it's all stopped. The whole Jewish people were saved. The same thing is true with a miracle, of any military miracle. People will want to rationalize, and people say, no, it was a guerrilla warfare, and guerrilla warfare sometimes, even though you're in much smaller numbers than the other side. All these rationalizations are ways of the Yetzer Hara, the evil impulse in us, to try to minimize God's role in everything. So in order for us to recognize that the miracle of the war was a real miracle, God made this miracle with a menorah, with a light. There no one could argue that it was natural for the oil to last 8 days when it only had enough for 1 day. So the Maharal looks at it from a little bit of a different vantage point, that the main miracle was the victory. But in order for us to appreciate that the victory was from God, they had the miracle of the menorah. But either way, that seems to be the main focus of Hanukkah. I mentioned this last week, that there seems to be a dispute between Maimonides and Nachmanides whether independence was a part of the reason for our celebration. Maimonides says we celebrate Hanukkah because we were given independence because of this battle. Before the story of Hanukkah, we were under Greek domination. Before that, under Persian domination. Subsequently, we were under Roman domination, but Hanukkah represented a time when Jews were independent. Nachmanides does not seem to appreciate that approach because he feels that that independence was not a proper thing. Why wasn't it proper? Because the Kohanim, who were the heroes of Hanukkah, were not allowed to take the position of monarchs, of kings. And even though the original Maccabees did not, they should have made sure that a descendant of King David should have been the leader. They could have been behind the throne, they could have helped him, but they didn't do that, and it degenerated into their descendants arrogating to themselves the position of king, and that was a terrible sin, Nachmanides says. If you look at it, the whole miracle of Hanukkah was really a messianic reality. When the Jews experienced the destruction of the first temple, and now they were coming back to build a second temple, that second temple had the potential of being the final temple. There's a prophet called Ezekiel. His name was Heschel, but when he came to Ellis Island, they changed it to Ezekiel. And Ezekiel prophesied about the third temple. But he was talking about the second temple. But the second temple was supposed to be the final temple. It wouldn't have been third. It would have been the second and final one. But the problem was the Jews did not appreciate the opportunity, and they came back in small numbers. The majority of Jews didn't come back to Israel, and they came back under Persian domination. So the second temple was a disappointment. There were elders who remembered the first temple, and when they saw the second temple, they were crying, because they realized that the glory of the second temple could not be like the first temple. Had the Jews returned with great gusto, with great hope for the future, and the majority of the Jews would have returned, that would have been the Messianic age. But it didn't work out that way. And Jews were under Persian domination. There were limits to their ability to do what they wanted to do. And then the Greeks took over, they made things worse. So when they defeated the Greeks, what was missing? They had independence. They had religious freedom, which they didn't have before under the Greeks. They had everything going. They experienced tremendous miracles. There was one thing missing. The Messianic age has to be inaugurated by Mashiach, by a Jewish leader who is a descendant of King David. It's not going to happen by itself. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 was not a Messianic thing because it wasn't inaugurated by Mashiach. It was a secular thing. It was a miracle, and we're grateful to God for all the miracles that He provides, but it wasn't a Messianic, contrary to some rabbis who did consider it a Messianic, but the Rebbe's approach was that it wasn't a Messianic phenomenon. It was a miracle, a taste of the future perhaps, but it has to come through Mashiach. It has to come through a leader. Just like, how did the Jewish people become a nation? How did it happen? It didn't happen by God doing it Himself. He did it through Moses, a leader. How did the Jews enter into the land of Israel? By Joshua, a leader. King David, a leader. And that's how the Messianic age will be ushered in, by Mashiach, a human leader who is the ideal human being, as great as even greater than Moses. In prophecy, he's second to Moses, and that could have happened in the miracle of Hanukkah. If the people would have said, now that we have independence, let's appoint a descendant of King David to be the king, to be the leader, that would have been the beginning of the Messianic age. But it didn't work out that way, and therefore the independence was not the ideal. That's the way I would explain Nachmanides' approach to it.
He's not wrong.
What?
He's not wrong.
He's not wrong?
Nachmanides, both of Maimonides are wrong.
No, I agree with both of them. Yes, I like to reconcile differences. What was the objective of the Greeks? To understand what the miracle of Chanukah is all about, we have to know what the Greeks wanted from us. So the Rebbe, quoting his father-in-law and others, points out that they were not opposed to Torah. They were not against the study of Torah, although it says they were. So the Rebbe says, no, they weren't. They were not opposed to the observance of the commandments, but they were. If the Jewish people would have studied Torah as literature, you know, there's a course at UB, there used to be a course, the Bible as literature. It still is?
Can't even help it.
The Bible as literature. If that's the only way that they would have applied themselves to Torah, it's beautiful literature, and it is. There's no more beautiful poetry than the book of Psalms and other biblical books. There's no more beautiful literature than the Torah. If they would have looked at the Torah as a profound source of philosophy, they would have admired it. They would have appreciated it. The Greeks, the Syrian Greeks, the ideologues. We're not talking about the rank and file, the ideologues who started this whole persecution. If people would have looked at a mitzvah and said, you know what, the mitzvah makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense for a person to take off 1 day a week and not work 7 days a week. We can rationalize and show how beautiful Shabbos is, as many have done, that psychologically it saves people from going crazy. If you have to work 7 days a week, you can lose your mind. You have a day of respite. If they would have looked at all the commandments simply as functional activities that makes your life better, easier, enriches your life, they would have said, fine, you have your way of doing it, we have our way of doing it, and fine, they didn't mind the actual mitzvah itself or the actual Torah study. They minded that Jews looked at the Torah as divine wisdom, that it transcended human wisdom. The Jews practice a mitzvah not because the mitzvah is comfortable, because the mitzvah is inspiring, because the mitzvah makes your life better, which it does, and there's nothing wrong with the fact that you believe that it does. Or we circumcise ourselves because it prevents us from a certain kind of cancer. Why we keep kosher because it's healthier, whether it's true or not is irrelevant, but that's what some people believe. And that's the reason why they keep kosher. That's fine, but that's not what the Jews were promoting. The Jews were promoting, this is what connects us to God. This is divine. And it transcends rationality. Moreover, there are different kinds of mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs that make sense, and there are mitzvahs that we can't understand. They're called chukim. The Greeks didn't mind the other mitzvahs. The chukim unnerved them. The chukim, what do you mean you're doing it because God said so, but it has to have a reason? Do you know the reason? No, I don't know the reason. Is there a reason? No, I don't think there's a reason. It's beyond reason. No, it's no such thing as beyond reason. Reason is God. In the 19th century, that's what happened in the 19th century. People began to believe in science, in reasoning. Everything has to have an explanation. And with science, we will solve all the world's problems. Yes, we have science in the 20th century, and we had a Holocaust. We have science in the 20th century, and you have ISIS and Hamas and all the other garbage. Science does not solve any problems of humanity. It provides us with instruments. It gives us opportunities, and we have to be grateful for it. And we have nothing against science. But if you think that you're going to replace God with science, it's a very, very sad conclusion. And that's what the Greeks were out to oppose. Now,
Rabbi, your statement that science doesn't do for humanity is absurd.
I said it does. It provides us with opportunities, but science does
more than opportunities. Science has been to medicine. Nothing is.
That's an opportunity to heal. Yes.
Science has made creations that are way beyond.
Hasn't made.
Through God, science has made.
Okay, you said the right thing, through God. If you believe in science in of itself, scientists, the Nazis, scientists were the most evil people.
Most physicists believe in God.
I have no problem with that. They do. So they're not just based on science.
Yeah, it's just.
If you base everything just on science, that will not make the world a better world.
That they have a Deus obscurditus, where God was there at the creation and then disappeared. But physicists in general, most believe in God.
That's great. We're not arguing. I'm saying if you just use science in and of itself does not solve the problems of humanity. We would have wiped out humanity with or without science. Yeah. And science makes it easier.
The problem with Western science is that it negates the whole spiritual aspect of existence.
Science and religion are not opposite. They're not opposed.
That's the whole point over here.
They're opposed.
Right, but you're misunderstanding me. If you disconnect science from God, then science is not going to make our lives better. Only if you connect it to a higher being, because only then will you have true morality, and only then will you not use science to wipe out entire nations.
Science explains the mechanisms, but not really the reason.
Right, it doesn't give you the reasons, and it doesn't tell you why there's a need for existence. Why should we even apply science? Why do we have to find cures for illnesses? Let's let people be sick. Who cares? Because you care. Why do you care? You have to ultimately go back to the fact that there is a higher force in this world, and you agree with that. Okay, so we're not arguing. But the Greeks were saying, just believe in logic, believe in science, don't believe that there's something higher. And do a mitzvah, but don't do it because of God, do it because it's a good thing to do. Now, the first thing they banned, we discussed this last week, were three things. They focused on these three things. Then they banned everything. But first they focused on Shabbos observance, on Rosh Chodesh, the first of every Jewish month, and circumcision. Why were they against these three in particular? I never saw anyone giving a definitive explanation why they chose these three, so I'm going to try to give some explanation for it. We'll start with circumcision. There were three reasons I think they didn't like circumcision. The Greeks glorified the body. To them, the body was a piece of art, and when they used to compete in the Olympics, they did so in the nude because the body to them was special. And circumcision defies that. Circumcision takes a part of the body and mutilates it. To them, that didn't make sense. Secondly, circumcision is a covenant between us and God to the exclusion of everyone else. They didn't tolerate the idea that Jews think that they're different. And if you think about most of anti-Semitism, maybe all of anti-Semitism, ultimately boils down to Jews being different. If Jews were not different, there would be no anti-Semitism. So one could argue, but the Jews in Germany were not different. That's what the Jews thought. The Germans knew they were. You can't fool the anti-Semites. They realize that Jews are different, that we are chosen. Whether they define chosen the way we define it or not is irrelevant. Being different is something that the anti-Semites can't tolerate. And circumcision is the greatest demonstration of one's belief that we are unique, that we are separated from the rest of humanity. The third reason is circumcision occurs on the 8th day. Number one, the baby at the 8th day does not have any understanding. No child, 8-day child, could have any understanding why they're being circumcised. If you want to circumcise someone symbolically, maybe do it when they're an adult. Okay, it hurts a little bit more, but there are ways of avoiding the pain. But do it to a little infant doesn't make sense. But maybe it was also because the number 8 was a number they couldn't tolerate. What does 8 symbolize in Judaism? 7 represents nature, 7 days of the week. 8 is transcending nature. Again, this was something they could not swallow. They could not stomach the idea of transcending nature. Nature to them was God. Why do they oppose Rosh Chodesh? Well, let's start with Shabbos. Why do they oppose Shabbos? Because, contrary to what many people think, Shabbos was given exclusively to the Jewish people. It's a sign between you and God. It's not given to the nations of the world. The nations of the world have no mitzvah to observe a Sabbath any day of the week. Certainly not on the 7th day of the week. That is exclusively a Jewish concept. Again, separating yourself from the rest of humanity was something they didn't like. Secondly, Shabbos represents the recognition of a creator. Why do we keep Shabbos? Because this is the way we demonstrate our belief that God is the creator of the heaven and earth, and that God is continuously creating heaven and earth. And that's why every week we can't just do one Shabbos and then the rest of our life we don't keep Shabbos. See, every week we keep Shabbos, a constant reminder that there is a creator. Again, the Syrian Greeks were opposed to that whole notion of God as a creator. Especially the notion that God is still involved, contrary to those scientists who believe that God started everything and now it's an automatic pilot. Maybe they didn't like that either because they didn't want to believe in any one God creator, but certainly not a God who's continuously creating. Rosh Chodesh was also opposed for similar reasons. Reason number one, why do we celebrate Rosh Chodesh? Because the moon is renewed. Why do we care about the renewal of the moon so much? Because the Jewish people are likened to the moon, and the moon waxes and wanes, but it'll always come back again. That the Jewish people always bounce back. That we can never be defeated. We can't be vanquished. Again, that's something that they couldn't tolerate. And Rosh Chodesh has another aspect to it, which is even more mystifying. Rosh Chodesh means the beginning of the month. The beginning of the month should be determined by the sighting of the moon, but yet it was determined by the Jewish courts based on the sighting of the moon. That means we, the Jewish people, have the power to decide what day of the month it is. It's not just an arbitrary day, but it's a day that has to be declared by the Jewish courts who represent the Jewish people. That means we have the power over nature. Again, that's something that the Greeks couldn't tolerate, the idea that we have power over nature, over time, which is more than just having power over physical space. Time is a little bit more abstract than space. You have power over space is one thing, you have power over time. That is something that they couldn't tolerate. Another thing about Hanukkah, I don't know when it started, and I don't know the sequence. I don't know if anyone knows the sequence of when they progressed from those three things that they banned to other things. But one of the things, and I mentioned this last week, is that they had a law that women who were getting married had to sleep with one of the Greek officials beforehand. And many women died rather than allowing that to happen. So the women suffered more than the men. And that's the reason that the women observe Hanukkah in ways more than men. In what way do they observe Hanukkah? That while the candles are burning, at least the first half hour that they burn after dark, women do not do tedious domestic chores. They don't do laundry, for example. They don't do sewing and weaving and things like that. They could do cooking. They could fry the latkes or the donuts. But they don't do tedious domestic chores. Why did they accept this form of observance that men do not do? Because women had a special role in the miracle, because their lives, their modesty, their morality was preserved, and their lives were preserved because many of them died not wanting to succumb to that threat. Why do they observe it by not working while the Hanukkah menorah is burning? It's similar to Rosh Chodesh. I mentioned that 2 weeks ago, that Rosh Chodesh, women also don't do tedious domestic labor. Why do women have a special relationship with Rosh Chodesh? Because they didn't worship the golden calf. They didn't participate in the contributions for the golden calf when the Jews were in the desert. And because they shunned idolatry to such an extent that they couldn't be tempted into giving their jewelry, when they were asked to give their jewelry, they were given a special observance of Rosh Chodesh. So the question is, what does not doing domestic chores have to do with Rosh Chodesh, and what does this have to do with Hanukkah? I have a long explanation, so I'll leave it for next week. Now, you asked the question that I said if we had time. What was your question again? Maybe I pray that people forget their questions. No, I don't.
I had a question about how is it possible that we don't celebrate Rosh Hashanah in the world to come?
We will, but it won't have the same power as the new holidays that we'll be celebrating Tisha B'Av.
Not Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur will still be around. All holidays will still be around. According to another midrash, it says Yom Kippur, it's Hanukkah and Yom Kippur and Purim. So there are three days that are.
Why Yom Kippur in the world to come? Why would we honor Yom Kippur in the world to come?
Because Yom Kippur is not just about atonement for sins. It represents getting in touch with your essence. That's why there are 5 prayers, and that's something the Mashiach will bring to the whole world.
Did the menorah in the temple before Hanukkah, was it always 8?
No, the menorah in the temple was 7 branches.
Oh.
Only 7. We do 8 because of the 8 nights that the candles, the olive oil burnt. So we do 8. In fact, we're not supposed to make a menorah out of 7 branches. We're not supposed to replicate the menorah in the temple. So we do 8, yes.
Is the Shamash considered a candle, or is that separate?
He's separate. He's separate. He's the servant. Shamash means servant. He serves all the others. He's the humble Shamash who serves everyone, but he's usually put on top of everyone. So sometimes the humble servant is really higher than the people he serves. And I have a story for that, but some other time.
Temples have a
If you remind me next week, I'll tell that story. What?
Temples have a Shamash, right? Temples have a Shamash, like custodian.
Right. He's more like a caretaker of the synagogue. He makes sure things are in order, and
My uncle was Shamash in the 20s of Abraham on Elmer.
Oh, okay. That's a very distinguished, even though it sounds like a menial task, it's a very noble task to be the caretaker in the shul. You know the story, I have to tell the story. This Jew comes from Europe and he tries to get a job as the shamash of the shul. So they asked him to, if he could read or write. He says, no, I can't, I'm illiterate. He says, no, you can't be the shamash in the shul, you don't know how to read or write. So what does he do? He borrows a few dollars, he buys some wares, and he has a push cart. He makes a good profit, he buys himself a store, he makes more money, he buys a department store, becomes this tycoon. He owns a whole network of department stores. And one day he needs a loan from the bank of $5 million. He comes in there and they asked him to sign, and he signs with an X. So they said, what is that? He says, I don't know how to sign my name. He says, imagine where you could have been if you knew how to sign. He says, yeah, I would have been the shamash in the local shul. But that would have been superior to being this magnet, because he's serving people in the shul. Do you remember your question?
No.
No, okay. It'll come back. Okay, everyone have a good week. Any questions on Zoom?
I wish you could remember. I wanted to hear the answer, but I can't remember what it was.
Here you go. Who class has a question?
I do remember I wanted to hear the answer.
It must be over 40. Anyone on Zoom remember the question?
I got a question totally unrelated, but totally related to the word Shamash. So how did it get translated into English? Beetle.
The beetle.
B-E-A-D-L-E.
Yes, in a church, I guess they have a beetle. That's probably where it comes from.
Shakespeare. Or no, not Shakespeare. He was writing Canterbury Tales. I think there's a beetle in Canterbury Tales.
Very weird stuff.
Okay, everyone have a good week.
What's going on here around Hanukkah celebrations?
You're going to light the candle.
Outside, right?
We usually have one night, yeah.
No. It's when Chabad has, or in fact, just not Chabad, but there's a halacha, you can't have
More than 20. They always.
when you put them on top of, let's say, apartment buildings, on top of a mountain, how does that work out?
That's a problem.
Or even
The big menorahs that they have, the big menorahs they have are designed to be no more than 32 feet.
when you have to use a crane to put the guy up there.
Yeah, 32 feet. The